Well, hey, welcome to the call this evening. We are so happy to see all these faces that are here. So listen, whether you're joining us live or whether you're watching this on a recording, we want you to know we've been praying for you. We've been praying for your family, and we've been praying about this whole parenting thing that we're going over. We talked about in previous weeks, we've actually held teaching this series and there's a future book coming as well.
Yep.
And so we're seeking your feedback as we're teaching this. What's resonating with you? What other best practices and stories do you have that's worked well for your parenting journey? Because we want to capture those. And as John Maxwell says, we give you credit, but we won't give you royalties.
He does say that, doesn't he?
He does say it. He says it all the time. But really, we've been looking forward to teaching this, but we have held off. Why don't you talk about why we've held off?
We held off because we wanted to make sure that our parenting principles that we felt were so brilliant actually worked.
That's exactly right. And so some of them did.
What? Here's what I would say. We have kids that lean into us, and I'm so grateful for that. We, by all means, have not done things perfectly. We're not perfect parents, and we don't have perfect kids, and we're not under the illusion that we do, but we do have great relationship with them. And we are very, very grateful for this time and this season.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we share tonight, just know that we're sharing the things that we felt really made the most impact for our family. Again, we're not perfect, but we feel like the things that God gave us did cause the result of having kids that lean into us rather than try to run from us. Mm-hmm. So we're very, very grateful for that. We'd love to hear the things that you're gaining from this series. Again, this is just for our group, for those that are close to the Rise community and people that are coaching clients of ours. We are not necessarily broadcasting this as a whole to a larger audience because so we'd love your feedback of the things that are standing out that really did help you.
Please do. And we're not kidding. Like we really want to hear from you. And so again, if this
so that we can make it better.
Yeah, we want to up level it. And so, there's a couple of things as we've been praying into this and thinking about putting this curriculum together and teaching a little bit. I noticed that one of the things that I see in parents, babe, is that sometimes they don't have the relationship connection with their kids, particularly as the kids begin to get weird.
They get older and they're becoming young adults. I did last week, by the way, when you weren't here, I did one of these things about hold up your hand, do an okay sign, and then quickly put it on your cheek. Okay. And then I went 1, 2, 3, and I went like this, and everybody half did like this, half did like this. And so
they thought they were being cute. They thought they were being smart, didn't they?
Yeah. Yeah. So all of that to say, when your kids begin to do this because it's what they've seen instead of this, and you get the idea.
Yeah. We do what we see, not what we hear necessarily. Right. They'll do what you tell them to do until they're about 13 or so. And then the truth is they're a product of their environment and they start doing what they see. And so that's why we spent so much time on marriage, because, we believe marriage is the tip of the spear in family. But when it comes to this parenting thing, babe, again, there's this gap sometimes in connection of the relationship, I think. And I think what happens, and I was actually serious when I said when the kids start getting weird, because look, if you've got kids and they've reached 13 to 16, 18, all throughout those years, bottom line is they just start getting weird. And the reason is because they're trying to figure out who the flip they are. And there's a lot of pressures in school and so on and so forth. And man, they can just get roasted and ostracized and so on and so forth, even for liking maybe and interacting with a kid that might be on the outside of their particular group. And so sometimes they're just a little snarky and they're learning how to express themselves. And then they become very withdrawn a lot of times. And disconnect from the parents. And what I see and what I was tempted with, and I know you were as well during that season, is just like, we don't know what to do. So we also kind of withdraw because we don't know what to do. And so the first thing I want to say this evening is that it is incredibly important that during that season, we get quiet. We ask the Holy Spirit, Lord, how do I reach my kids? And a lot of the things that we're going to talk about this evening really has to do with how we continually build that relationship with them and let them know that we're for them, not against them. And there's going to be some really cool best practices that we'll share of some things that we learned along the way in some future calls. So stay tuned to these calls. There's going to be more and more to come. One of the things that we grew up with that I remember hearing over and over again from my parents is, because I told you so, that's why, and
why do I have to do that? Because I told you so.
Exactly right. And we were lucky if we even got that far, because honestly, a lot of times, asking the question why would get you served with a backhand. Now, I'm not at all trying to say that our parents were bad parents. What I'm saying though is that it was an era, and it was something that as we tried to pan back from ourselves and peek back into what it looks like to and feels like to be a kid, it was something that we resolved that we didn't want to do. Now, I'm not saying that there's not a time and a place for I told you so, because I think that our kids need to learn to respect our voice. And I think that the way that they learn to respect our voice is when we respect our voice, or excuse me, when we respect their voice.
Yep.
And so that does not mean that we endorse back talk. There's kind of a trend these days, I think, of allowing the kids to express themselves. And listen, there's a ditch on either side of the road. I want y'all to listen to me, okay? Because we've tinkered with this on both sides. We've observed it in our families. We've observed it. We're not just shooting from the hip on this stuff.
Right.
There is a fine line there, love. And I think that fine line is, yes, the kids need to learn how to express themselves, but listen, they need to learn how to articulate themselves and their feelings in a healthy way. And throwing an absolute fit is not okay, and allowing them, to learn how to express themselves. That's not going to work in the real world. It's just not.
Right.
And so we need to make sure that we're paying attention and that we're calling.
Yeah. We're
calling their bluff when they're doing things like that, and letting them know, look, that's not acceptable. You're better than that. And so we really tried to learn to speak life over them and say things like, you're better than that, right? And call them up when they were acting that way. So we never turned a blind eye to things like that. If I saw facial expressions and things of that nature, like, I nailed it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you get any comments on that before I go into the rest of this final?
No, I think tonight is all about and the title is actually teach your kids how to think, not just what to think. And in order to do that, you have to have influence. And in order to have influence, you have to have relationship.
And you have to have permission.
And you have to have permission.
You have to have permission. And that sounds weird when we're talking about our kids, but the way we gain permission is by gaining trust.
Sure.
Through the relationship, and I think that sometimes that means that we explain why. So the very first point is really, instead of I told you so, one of the things that we really worked at was explaining to our kids why. I love when my kids ask me why, because it gives me an opportunity to teach them, listen to me now, to teach them why. And why is that important? Because that's what helps them learn how to navigate decision making and learn to become independent. So maybe we, rewind and say, okay, what's our purpose as parents? What do you think our purpose? What have we decided our purpose is?
So our purpose as parents, we landed on that we wanted our kids to be successful. We wanted our kids to know their identity of why they were created, their purpose in life, and we want them to know that they were loved unconditionally. In addition to that, we wanted to make sure that their faith was exactly that, their faith. That they weren't borrowing our faith, because the truth is there was no way that we could police them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And even if we could police them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we couldn't control their inner thoughts or their inner feelings. And so it was really important for us to, again, build that relationship with them rather than just throw a bunch of rules at them and expect them to adhere. So we'd like to be able to have those discussions on why we had the rules in place that we had in place.
Yeah. So, You want to write this one down if you've not heard it before, but we often talk about this. We probably heard it someplace else, so I don't know for sure whether we're the originators of it, but
I'm pretty sure we originate, or we're going to take credit for it.
so be it. But rules without relationship breeds rebellion. Rules without relationship equals rebellions, both in children and adults alike. And I think that it is just a mark of good leadership. And after all, really, that's what we're talking about when it comes to our kids. And I think that sometimes that can elude us, right?
Right.
But the truth is what we're doing is we're leading. So I often think to myself when I'm in a leadership position, whether it's in the home or, outside of the home, who do I want to follow? Right. And what causes me to follow a leader? And so it becomes a guidepost and sort of a navigational beacon, so to speak, of my actions.
So, here's the thing, and we're talking because we know that we're talking to some of you that have itty bitty ones at home. Some of you have teenagers, some of you have adult children. And so the part of building relationship is to make sure that you're doing that at an age appropriate. There's a shift. And we talked about this a bit last week of the shift between being mom to being a coach, or to being the different roles that we play in the different seasons of life. And so as far as building relationship, I think one of the ways we build relationship is actually to be able to express the intent of our heart to our kids. Being able to be slow enough to talk to them age appropriate of why we're making the decisions that we're making, like you alluded to, Greg, but then also being able to express our intent. And we'll be sharing about this in the future weeks, but we would tell our kids, we want you to red line on fun. We just don't want you to blow the engine.
Yeah, don't go too deep there because you
Our
give away
job-
teaching is good. I don't want to do it this call.
But our job is to make sure that they're safe and secure. And so even when our kids didn't necessarily understand, like we would explain our why, they wouldn't agree with our why, but they would adhere to the rule because they understood that they may not fully grasp it right now, but they could trust our heart. And I liken it a lot to our relationship with God, right? God is a perfect father. And for some of you, this is really important to hear. Maybe your kids have went astray. That doesn't mean you were a bad parent.
Yeah.
It's so important to hear that, because God's a perfect parent. And yet how many of us did make some blunders along the way? So be relieved.
So it's got to screw up.
Right. No, he's not a screw up, and he's not a bad dad. And the same is for us, is like there were times where our kids made decisions opposite of what we wanted them to make, even when they understood the why. But the important part is to be able to bridge that relationship, because what you said, Greg, is so important. Rules without relationship absolutely breeds rebellion. Now, will there still be some rebellion? Yeah, but I think the stronger the relationship is, the less likely they are. Just like in our relationship with God, sometimes we don't understand what he's doing or why he's doing, and we might throw a little fit and go our own way. But it's the kindness of God that leads us to repentance. It's that relationship with him that draws us back. It's not the rule itself that draws us back. It's not the law that draws us back. It's not the punishment that draws us back, right? It might get our attention, but the truth is it's the relationship with God that causes us to want to do good and not to do bad.
Yeah.
Any thoughts from you?
Oh man, I had a million, but I think that at the end of the day, one of the greatest lessons that I learned along the way, and I wished I'd have learned it a lot earlier, because I think this applies when they're small just as much as when it does when they're big. I think the application and the delivery is slightly different. I really do, but I think it's important, babe, that we communicate with them in a way that they feel respected as well. Now, I'm going to tell you, I have a strong hand. I really do. And we run a pretty tight ship and always have. So it doesn't mean that I will not in a heartbeat call them to action and call them up or call them out. But what I failed to do very well a lot of times in their early years was to do that in a more respectful manner. Now, I'm not afraid to swat them on their hind end when they're little. We did that, and I'm not advocating beating kids. And I know everybody's got different opinions on that. The Bible says, spare the rod, spoil the child. And the way I see it, if you don't do it out of anger, when we do it out of anger, then we're absolutely a foul. We cannot do that. And sometimes that means that I've delayed punishments until I cooled my jets just a little bit and then discerned, is a spanking the proper thing? There's been a lot of times I would smack the fire out of kids' hands, when they were small, because they were getting ready to do something really stupid was going to hurt them, and I want to make sure that I reached them. But at the end of the day, I think if you keep it in with perspective, it was a radical mindset change for me when I feel like God said to me my problem child was our son, and when he said to me, you need to treat him with respect and you need to speak with him with respect. And when you do that, he will then learn what it is to communicate with respect rather than just steamrolling. Right. And so it was huge. And so one of the things that we teach in marriage is when we're talking about communications, we talk about, and we live by, listen for understanding, not for reply. Well, somebody needs to hear that again. Listen. This takes tremendous discipline, especially for us Americans. We hear about the first three words, whether it's our spouse or whether it's our kids or otherwise, and we start formulating how we're going to respond to what they're saying rather than calming that inner dialogue down and slowing that inner dialogue down and giving that person our full attention. And it does so much for a human to feel as though they've actually been heard. That alone, a lot of times, will just communicate so much and cause people to calm a bit if they feel like that they've been understood. And so one of the cues is to not repeat back what they said, but when we listen for understanding, then usually our reply won't be our point. It will be a question to clarify the understanding, right? And as we've done that in our relationship, it's up leveled. And as we've learned then to extend that same level of respect and skill set of listening, it's helped our relationship with our kids as well. So when our kids ask a question of why, a lot of times, and I give all the credit to you. In fact, I really prefer you
just the credit. I get the credit.
Yeah, dude, she's taught me so much on this. But in fact, I'd even like you really to teach this point and just to carry on from this point. And I'll talk about some of the other stuff in a minute.
A big part of what we would do is if our kids asked us a question, we would reiterate a question back. And I'm not talking like psycho babble of what I hear you saying is. It wasn't that. It actually had depth and meaning. So they would come to us, they would ask us a question, and we would actually go, well, tell me why you're asking that question, or give me more information. Why are you asking that? I think I learned it. I can't really take the question because I watched it in the life of Christ. As I read through my Bible, I was so taken back by how many times, like, the disciples would come to Jesus and they'd ask him a question, or the Pharisees or Sadducees would come along and they were really trying to trip him up in a question. And rather than Jesus giving the insights and the wisdom, which if anybody had the right to give insights and wisdom, it would have been Jesus, because he had the right insights and wisdom. Instead, I watched how he masterfully asked a question back. And he did it for a twofold reason that I can see. One was because, first of all, he wanted to see what was in their hearts. And second, I believe he was asking the questions because he was causing them to formulate what they actually believed. And so, reflect on it. And so I thought, wow, that's a really cool way to be able to interact with people. And what we found with our kids is a lot of times they would come to us and they would ask us a question. And it was by us asking them a question back that we gained the information of what they were asking, why they were asking it. So before we actually share some of the questions that we used with our kids, I want to pose a question to you. Okay, and so we're just going to pause. We're going to slow the conversation way down. And the very first question is, what do you believe is the most important thing that you can do right now in the season that you're in to build relationship with your kids?
Boy, write that question down. The question again is, what is it in this season? What is one thing that you feel like you need to do to build relationship with your kids? I love that question, babe. I love that question.
And then the second question is, why do you have the rules in place that you have in place?
Oh, that's fire.
Yeah. You know, and the thing about that is, you know, it was interesting to me because as we did this in our relationship, as I did this in my own parenting as a mom, there were some times that I had a rule in place, but I couldn't quite actually even articulate why I had the rule in place.
Sometimes a borrowed philosophy.
And sometimes it was just a borrowed philosophy. And here's the thing, if I didn't have the unction or the backbone to back it up, or the why behind what I was enforcing a rule, I actually probably didn't have the relationship to enforce that rule. But if I had a firm understanding of why I was doing, or why we were making a decision, I could better leverage that with I don't know, just a clear conscience, and be able to articulate it with my kids in such a way that whether they agreed with it or not, they would adhere to it because they understood our heart.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the two questions: how can you in this season build relationship with your kids? And for those of you that have little ones, let me just say, it's never too early to begin to speak your intent. And for those of you that have older kids, it's never too late for you to speak your intent to your children, your heart of that you want to be a good parent, that you want to be supportive, that you want to be encouraging, your intent as a parent.
So I want you to get some of the sample questions,
okay,
that we ask the kids. But beforehand, I want to prompt you all that I want to give you the why. You know, the reason that we learn to make questions such a big part of our parenting is because we really learn what the purpose of their question is. You know, we begin to learn what's going on in their heart. What is really behind the question. And particularly as they get older, the older that they get, then the more pertinent that this actually becomes.
Right. Yep.
You know, and so I just want to encourage you that's why, because sometimes what happens is we react, or we answer a question that really isn't the question that they're wanting the answer to, you know? And so when we dig a little bit deeper, with one another, with our kids, and even with God, and we say, tell me more, why do you ask that?
Yeah.
Right. Then it's funny because we've watched them multiple times. It kind of rocks them back in their chair. Like, I expected you to hit me with both barrels as to why I shouldn't have sex before marriage. You know what I mean? And give me a bunch of biblical rules and regulations, you know, and things of that nature, which will eventually come. But we need to understand what's behind the question so that we can understand what it is that they're processing. And I think that has allowed us then to not only be a leader, a respected leader in their lives, but to be a coach, you know?
Yeah.
And good coaches ask great questions. In fact, I would say that, you know, John Maxwell has an entire book that's dedicated. He says good leaders ask great questions. And I'll tell you what, we've got some of these in stock, in fact, and I would just tell you that if you want a copy of Good Leaders Ask Great Questions, you just shoot us a message and let us know that you want one. Make a contribution of any size to Married for a Purpose. You can go to our site. It's really easy to do that. There's a button that says give, and you just walk through the steps, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so making sure, because we've been updating systems, but and we'd be happy to send you one. They're autographed too, aren't they?
Yep, they're autographed by John.
Got John's signature on them. So anyway, so questions can be a really, really key of relationships, period,
Yeah.
but certainly in building relationships.
So here's some of the questions. And again, we understand some of you have little kids, and it's not that you're going to pose these questions to little kids of why should I not do this or why are you doing that? But I do think that even as young kids, we try to explain our heart to our kids. And then we love to get into dialogue about what they were thinking about, what they were dreaming about. And that's just a conversation that you do with any kind of relationship. So again, some of the sample questions that we used, we would say, we'd often say, we know what we believe, but before we share our thoughts, we'd love to hear yours. So we know what we believe. We have a firm conviction of why we do or don't do certain things. I'd love to know your thoughts. What are you processing?
Mm.
And so that,
So what you're saying that we ask them,
yep.
what do they believe, or why do they think we would have that rule?
Yeah, you know,
Or,
in summer, our middle one was more of a biblical scholar. So she'd come in and she'd ask these things about something. It's like, you know, I know exactly why I believe what I believe. What makes you ask that question? What are you processing?
mhm,
Or what do you believe about that?
mhm.
We would ask, what do you think? What are your friends saying? Wow, that was a good one. Because we would get to hear not only what their thoughts were, why they were asking the question, but what they were being fed by their
What
teachers,
was influencing them?
by their friends. And so rather than just immediately responding with a response and say, because I said so, or because the Bible says so, or given a long lecture of why they should be a virgin, or why they shouldn't drink, or why they should or shouldn't get a tattoo, or whatever, you know, why they can't spend the night over at somebody else's house. Like, we had conversations like with them of what their thoughts were, what it was that their friends were saying. And then we would also ask them, you know, if they began to tell us what their friends were saying, we'd say, well, talk to us a little bit more about how that's playing out in your friend's life. What are you seeing? Because let's take dating for an example. If they had a conversation about that, and having a lot of different in and out relationships, we would say, how's that going, like 2 or 3 weeks in? And they began to describe to us the things that were happening and how it was affecting their friends, which in all of that allowed them to begin to process the repercussions or the consequences of the decisions that they were making.
Yeah, on that one, I remember that came up a couple different times,
Yeah.
actually, throughout the, I'm going to say 14, 15, right around there, all the way up through really almost present, not exactly present for our kids because they're in their 20s, but and I just remember, love, that by asking them to process things, and we would guide them a little bit with our questions. We'd ask leading questions like, tell me something. Are your friends dealing with a lot of drama because of breakups, multiple breakups? Are they practicing for divorce? Do you feel like that, there's just drama all the time in their lives, and are they ups and downs, and anyway, it was just good to be able to engage them and get them conversating, because it felt like they were being listened to.
Yeah.
And they were being listened to, but I mean, we were intentional about trying to make sure that they felt like they were heard. And again, you know what I mean? Like, listen, believe me, there were some balls that went past us, strike one, right? But in general, when we nailed it, these are the things that we saw that drew them in and caused them to trust us and have conversations with us about things. Remember one time in particular?
Yeah, you got to tell this story.
One of them came to us and said, and you know what? Like when they're teenagers, it's always at nighttime. But
That's
listen,
true.
I
when
need,
they come awake and you want to just like crash and die. Yeah.
We're like, dying, and they come in 9:30, 10, 11, something like that, and we're like one eye open. But that's when they want to communicate. And I think it's also a good thing just to mention, it is actually a natural phenomenon. I should have done some research on this, but I didn't know it was going to come to me. But there is science that backs this up, that during their teen years, their clocks, their internal clocks get a little bit whacked. And so about the time we're wanting to land the plane, they're at their peak. And I just want to let you know, for you parents that have teenagers, that is actually a really good time, not every night, but to make sure that there are some 1 or 2 nights a week where you're intentional to stay up a little later, go in the room and talk to them, or meet them on their terms, because they will open up to you more at that time in the evening than they will at any other time of the day for whatever reason. But anyway, they asked, so tell me again why I shouldn't have sex before marriage. And I really would love, again, I would love for you to talk about
first of
this,
all, my kids told me stuff that I'm like, I would have never, ever talked to my parents about that.
Which is a good sign. However, I can tell you there were times it was kind of like, I'm not too sure. I wish you hadn't told me that.
Yeah. I think that's why I had the response that I did, because when they asked, why should I be a virgin when I get married? I was like, and what makes you ask that question? I'd really love to know what's going on in that brain of yours.
No, but it was a really key and
Mhm.
very strategic response back, though, wasn't it?
Yeah. So instead of giving them all the reasons why they should, bringing out the lesson from scripture of why they should, it really was, that was the conversation that we said, well, what makes you ask that? Why are you asking that question? And then they began to tell us about their friends and how even some of their Christian friends, and I shouldn't do Christian, I mean, even their Christian friends were entertaining, having sex out of marriage,
Or had already.
or already had, and they were like the only ones in the high school that had. They had teachers telling them that they should have sex with multiple partners before they ever got married, so that they would know what they liked. And I was taken back by all the information. And so
About ready to string up some teachers too, to tell you the truth.
so that's
Right.
where, we actually leveraged the consequences of actions.
Yep.
We asked about any breakups that they'd seen. At an age appropriate, we began to talk about the hardships of our life, the things that we wish we could have changed, the things that we did do right, and talked about the consequences of decisions and along that line.
Well, and we talked about the things that we did wrong pretty
Yeah.
openly, and you have to use your own discernment in this, because it's kind of like, we learned when we began to do public speaking and writing, that when you tell a story, you don't tell the story for you. It's not about you telling your story, right? It's about the audience and how you can relate to the audience with your story. And so there's some things you share, and then there's some things you don't share, right? And so I think the same thing is apropos in these
With the kids,
conversations with our
age
kids.
appropriate, yeah.
We kind of need to think about, what do we share? But I've been very transparent about my mistakes and things that I regretted and things that I wished I had done. And, the other thing too, I think that has been very pertinent is we have talked about, and I know there's a million different opinions of this, but the bottom line is we talked about what we feel are generational curses, things that have been passed down, things that were behaviors that we learned, and then behaviors that seem to have showed up, and temptations that we had to fight that we didn't even know that we observed, if we did, but yet we found ourselves there. In retrospect, we can see that it's been kind of a generational thing. And so we talked with our kids, and early on in our marriage, I know you and I had some really good in-depth conversations about, okay, what are the things that stop right here?
Right.
What are the things that we need to make sure? And one of those was yelling at the kids.
Sure.
And listen, I'm not going to tell you that I've never yelled at my kids. I've yelled at my kids because I have lost my crap a couple of times. Okay. But what I'm saying is that we resolved that we would not. And we made it a rule, that yelling at your kids, what it does is it causes insecurity. It causes nervous kids. It does not help. It really doesn't, unless they're about to run in the street and you have to yell, stop, you know what I mean? Or something like that. So that was something that we wanted to make sure that didn't happen. And so as we talked about what were the generational curses that we wanted to have stop with us, that didn't carry on, we talked with our kids about that as well. And then there were things in the sense of transparency and being, what worked, what didn't work, and all that good stuff with you guys as well. We also shared with them things that were still things that we have messed up, that we're asking them to consider to break that generational curse and for it to stop with them. And I think that, we talked, I think last week you talked about family unity and family identity. We're Gormans, and instilling family pride. And I think having those kind of conversations and those transparent conversations really caused, like, okay, we're Gormans and we're working for a better good here. And it's not just about us. It's about living in such a way that, our Christianity and our faith is contagious, not chucking Bibles at people and cramming scriptures down their throat. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with scriptures. I'm saying that we need to live in such a way that we're contagious and people catch what it is that we have and they want it, rather than trying to cram it down their throat. And this is one of the ways that we do that. Okay.
Right. So with all of that, I think, again, this is where the intent of the heart comes in. And so we talked to them about what we hoped that they would break, that quite honestly, we didn't break. Again, most of you know our stories where we grew up in pretty dysfunctional families. And so we didn't make the right decisions. We weren't virgins when we got married. There were things that we couldn't not undo. And so in that, we were able to talk to them about the heartache that accompanied and the things that we wished we would have done and the reasons why we wished we would have done what we did. We also didn't just come from a biblical standpoint. We also went into kind of a scientific standpoint. Now, here's the grace of God, because about the time that my kids were asking me this question, we were reading a book and I was interviewing, I think it was Bill and Pam Farrell, and we did some research around kids who had been promiscuous. And so the interesting fact, and I wrote them down, sexually active girls are more than 3 times more likely to be depressed than girls who are not sexually active.
No question about that.
And sexually active boys are twice as likely to be depressed than boys who are not.
And that's when can I chime in?
Yep.
So that's not just sexually active. That's when they start dabbling in porn or looking at things that they shouldn't. I have observed this in kids, you know, and you can tell when they've got that heaviness on them, right? You can kind of sense that there's something. You may not know that that's exactly what it is, but you can tell that their spirit is heavy, because the bottom line is like it or not, whether you share a faith or not, you know, the truth is that sin makes our heart heavy. It affects our spirit, you know.
We also, one of the other statistics was that sexually active girls are nearly 3 times more likely to commit or to attempt to commit suicide, and sexually active teenage boys are 8 times more likely to attempt suicide than boys that are not. And so I know it took us back. And so when we were able to share those things with our kids, again, I love God's timing, how he had given us those statistics at that time period. We were able to share. So this isn't just a faith thing. And then that's where, you know, we'd be able to say, how are your friends reacting when they go through a breakup? And they were able to process that, which in turn put the ownership back on them, because we couldn't police them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So with the intent of our heart, some statistics that are even outside of our religious programming, our faith. And then of course we would also share our faith of what we believe. And we talked about the character and the person of God and what his heart was to protect them.
Well, and I think
the designer of sex.
Yeah. And I think that outside of just sex, you know what I mean? Just in general, teaching our kids how to really live in faith,
right?
Being guided in their daily walk by the Holy Spirit, right? And it really comes down to, it really is a faith transference and understanding of, like, is God's plan better than my plan? You know, is God's plan for my life better? And you know what? There's some of you that this will challenge you, because I'm just tell you, it challenges me. Even today in different seasons, I have to reckon with it, you know, and I have to recognize that sometimes God doesn't give me what I want. He doesn't give me what I've prayed for. He has a different outcome. And in those, what I've learned, and I'm getting better and better at now, is that I'm not going to debate the sovereignty of God in those things. I'm going to trust that he's got a better plan than I do, because I'm pretty sure he does, right? And so I think having those kind of, again, conversations with our kids as they're coming up, teach them to really to trust God. And even trust him in times when we don't get what we want and we deal with disappointments and such. And we've even talked about some specific things. So we did share our faith. We shared reasons why we thought what we thought. We did research and we shared some of those things. We talked about our biblical worldview. And then, like Julie said, we also covered, you know, sometimes kind of literally the clinical side of things. Don't speak outside of something that you haven't researched, you know, and don't try to just wing it when it comes to stuff like that. This is what we do, and we've always taken it very, very seriously. And so we have done a lot of research on it.
You know, and I think on that note too, Greg, it's not a bad thing to pause. And if your kids give you some thoughts and you're not able to articulate it, just say, you know what, this is a discussion that is worthy more than me just giving you an off the cuff answer.
Absolutely.
So
we've done that a lot.
So give me some time to process this so that I can best articulate it in a way that I think will be meaningful to you.
And then the final thing, on this point is that we did share, outside of clinical, outside of biblical worldview, outside of, we just shared kind of, here's the rules for the road as long as you're living in my house.
Right.
Just need you to understand. I don't care how old you are, if you're 2 or 22, right? These are the rules and these are the expectations. And to be here, you are still under our authority. And as long as you're here, then here are some of the things that we believe are rules for the road, and we are happy to explain to you why those exist. And I think that those morph over time, obviously, as the kids get a little bit older. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we age appropriated the rules and things of that nature, because they weren't really age appropriated. We're going to tell you how the kids learned to earn privileges rather than expect privileges because they reached a certain birthday or whatever. But that's
so, all of that to say, we're not saying not to parent. We're not saying don't share your faith. Obviously, Jesus didn't leave the disciples to try to be out there floundering around, just asking questions and then asking another question. There's a point where using stories, Jesus used parables to gain an analogy in between. And so being able to use wisdom as parents, but also in a place where the whole topic tonight is teaching your kids how to think, not just what to think. So there are times where you give a little bit of the what, but you don't necessarily land just there. You're teaching them how to. So how did we teach kids to parent? If you're taking notes,
kids to parent.
I mean, how do we teach our kids how to think?
It's easy for you to say.
I know, right? Thanks for getting to my brain. You knew what I was trying to say. We're going to give you 5. So if you're taking notes, ready? Here's number 1. How do you teach your kids how to think? Number 1, ask questions that lead your kids into good decision-making skills. You do that also by providing an atmosphere where they can share. So instead of giving that knee-jerk, I told you so.
Or reacting,
right? You ask your kids, tell me a little bit more. What are you thinking? Why are you asking that question? And then, tell me a little bit more about that. So that first point is ask questions to your kids that lead them to actually good decision-making by asking them what they think, asking them to tell you more about what they're thinking, asking them what they believe about their questions, because usually they already have an opinion when they're coming to you with a question. So as a parent, it's so important to understand what they're thinking, why they're thinking it, who's influencing all of that, so that you can get a better understanding to navigate the discussion. All right, number 2, don't be afraid to let them process out loud. Right.
So when we're doing reboots, one of the things I'm constantly on you about is hold the pen, hold the pen, let people process and then capture the real thought. Right.
Do they really believe this? But walk them through the fullness of their thoughts, help them gain understanding, and be patient through that process. In other words, sometimes we're so afraid of the decision they're going to make that we want to give them information, where if we let them process out loud, they're probably going to land on the information that you want to give them, but they're going to be more receptive to it. And even asking permission is like, okay, so I hear you saying this. Can I give you my perspective? That permission to be able to, it's just respect. All right. 3rd.
Well, let me just quickly on that.
Yep.
Here's the kicker, and I've blown this. Trust me, I've blown this. Okay. But the reason that it's important is because if you don't have permission, you're wasting your breath anyway. Think about it. The old adage is you can lead a horse to water, right? But you can't force him to drink. And I think that sometimes we think that if we're just overbearing enough, that they'll just do it, right? And I'm just telling you, it's a bad philosophy.
Actually, the opposite really works. If they're like dogmatic about something, it's just like, okay. Especially if you have older kids and they've made up their mind, it's like, okay. And they're like, well, what do you think? It's like, you don't want to know what I think. You've already made up your mind. By doing that, and not in an angry way, not in a manipulation, but we've recognized there's times where we just don't have the influence. As much as we've had the intention to be good parents, we realize we don't have influence here. And by us stepping back and saying, it's okay, you've already made up your mind. We can see the train a coming. but we're not going to ever tell you I told you so. We're just going to hold it. And then a lot of times, because we haven't been dogmatic, they'll come back and say, no, I really do want to
Yeah,
hear.
they'll process and come back a lot of times, especially again, if you've got the relationship and you've built the mutual respect with them.
Hey, we're getting ready to go to open up the phone lines, and we want to be able to hear your thoughts. I'm going to give you 3 more very quickly.
So listen, get in the queue if you got a question or a comment.
Raise your hand right away, so when we unpin it, we'll see your little faces. All right, nope, not your little faces, your faces. Number 3, don't pass judgment. Filter your conversation with grace and understanding. And what I mean by that is there's sometimes where they're going to have a thought that's separate of yours. They're going to be independent, and man, you can get mad at them. And the moment that you know that you're mad at them or you're passing judgment on them, you've lost the opportunity for the influence.
Man, it sucks too, because I just wince when you say that, because I know how many times I've not gotten that right.
I'm really preaching.
I've gotten it right a couple of times. I've gotten it right a couple of times, guys.
Number 4, speak the truth in love. And so we're not just saying turn a blind eye.
Yes.
It comes back to that question of what does love require? And sometimes it's just saying, guys, we can see the train coming. We know you're going to make this decision. You'll never hear us tell you, I told you so, but we do want you to remember this moment. And there have been different seasons. I had a season with one of my kids that there were a lot of people feeding in their ear that I was being manipulative. And I was like, I'm not being manipulative. I see their manipulation. But at one point, I literally said, I need you to know this. They're manipulating you, but you'll never hear me say it again past this conversation. And I let it go. And the truth did end up unfolding. And with that child, I have a whole lot more leverage.
Yeah. And by the way, this particular piece that we're talking about obviously is for older kids.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
So those of you with younger kids, it's a little bit different, approach, because there's a place for reasoning, and then there's a place where, again, you are the authority of your home, and you have to say, you know what, check it out. Here's the deal. You may want to make this decision, but you're not going to make this decision. I am going to make this decision for you.
And the reason why I'm making this decision is because I love you.
That's exactly
and
right.
I am protecting you, even if you don't realize it right now.
But I'll tell you, after they hit the teenage years, for the most part, and again, we're going to go deeper into this particular piece in future lessons. We basically told them, you do whatever you want to. You're just going to face the consequences. So again, we're going to go deeper down that rabbit hole in a different day. But the bottom line is, you can do whatever you want to, but you need to understand you are going to face the consequences. So we're not going to bail you out.
Number 4, speak the truth in love. And number 5, when you do have the buy-in of your kids, man, your stories and your life experience, leverage them, because they do love you, they do respect you, and they want to know exactly why you're doing what you're doing. So leveraging your stories are good. So
teach them how to think, not what to think.
That's it.